Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to the last in our series of Brexit from a European perspective. Thus far, we've spoken to the Brexiteers in Brussels and then to the Euro enthusiasts. This week, confusion reigns yet again at Westminster. Everything seems to be changing, but is anything actually happening? The whole game board has been tipped up with the fragmentation of the major parties. Theresa May signals ruling out a no-deal Brexit to stave off more cabinet resignations. Corbyn swings to a people's vote to stave off more party resignations. But does any of this brinkmanship actually alter the hard arithmetic of the Brexit numbers in the House of Commons? This week, we turn to the view from Europe's most powerful nation of Germany and to the most senior MEP in the European Parliament. Christian Democrat politician Elmar Brok is the longest-serving member in the European Parliament, and among his many achievements, he contributed crucially to the development of the European Constitution. How does he believe Brexit will play out? Then we focus on Scotland's role in the new European firmament. One of the most popular columns in the Europress is the Jacobite column in the Brussels Express. Normally, James Wilson specialises on Eastern Europe, but today we ask him to cast his eye over the future of his homeland of Scotland. But first to Alex, with your tweets, your messages and your emails.
Well, quite a lot of reaction to our view from Brussels on what other Europeans think of Brexit. Harold III is not impressed. Who cares what European countries think of us? They've disliked England for centuries, and it continues so. Why hand over our country to their control? We're not all stupid. Well, Harold III. Harold II was Harold Godwinson, King of England, took one in the eye from the Normans in 1066. But then, of course, Harold was half Danish. Tricky thing, these European connections. Now, Doug Troop says realignment of Westminster politics equals let's have another go at getting rid of Corbyn. That's what it's about. Well, Christine Anderson says simply, I am in despair. I can't believe we're leaving the European Union. Angus Black makes a Scottish point, says the old alliance was before the Union of the Crowns, but Scots law didn't merge in the UK. Why is there so much talk and so little action, asks Angus. And Gavin Wilson says Scotland has a choice to leave the UK and to return to the European Union or have another alternative to choose from. But Wendy Graham-Gordon says, with all these people micromanaging our lives, how is it that things have gone so wrong? And so see all of us, Wendy.
Elmar Brok has been a leading politician in the Parliament for the best part of 40 years. A two-time chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, no one knows more about the development of the institution, and no one is better placed to assess the impact of Brexit.
Elmar Brok, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Elmar Brok, you're Europe's most experienced parliamentarian. In that long career of almost 40 years, did you ever think you would see the point at which a major state was on the brink of leaving the European Union?
No, it's a big surprise for me. I had a good personal relationship to Margaret Thatcher. I was with her in '75 on the demonstration in London in that referendum at that time. And I never believed that Britain will have no interest in its own interests anymore. And therefore, I do not understand that this most practical nation of the world is going into an ideological affair.
And in that time, Britain has gone from leading Europe into the single market in the 1980s to perhaps leaving the European Union altogether. Is that, in your opinion, down to developments in British politics, in British society, or is it something to do with the developments in the European Union as well?
I think Britain has undersigned and ratified all developments in competence of the European Union. The internal market was, in fact, partly invention of the British politics and of British politicians, and supported by Margaret Thatcher. I think this is a big change in British policy, in society, as part of globalization, the questions of different opinions in different parts of society, from blue-collar workers to small and business people. That is, I think, a development we have in many places, but only Britain has taken over the power.
Now, from what you're reading of the Theresa May's deal that negotiated with Michel Barnier, do you, in your estimation, think that is a good deal for Europe and a good deal for Britain? Or can you understand the the scepticism in both places that it might not be as good a deal as staying in the European Union?
I think this proposal for the backstop to the customs union, just in case as an insurance, was a British invention, not ours. We had other proposals. But I think to have a withdrawal agreement would give us 2 to 4 years' time to negotiate a proper deal for the future without any change for the moment. And therefore we have total free way for business because no changes happens in the next 2 years. And we could negotiate a proper free trade agreement, but also agreements on internal and external security. We will lose this time, and a hard Brexit does cost only money for all of us, more for Britain because of the different size. And therefore, I would prefer such a withdrawal agreement. And there's 1% chance, perhaps, that this backstop will ever be used if we do it properly. And because of this 1% chance that it could happen to destroy the whole thing, I think is quite stupid.
Elmar Brok, you've seen many crises in the European Union over the last few decades. In your estimation, is this one which can be solved by a last-minute compromise with the developments that are happening in Westminster this week, perhaps a sign of more accommodation in Brussels? Or do you think there's still a very real danger of going off the cliff edge to a hard Brexit?
I think there's a good chance to come to the hard Brexit. We cannot move in a question where we have to be afraid in the integrity of the internal market. Therefore, we have to find the solution for the Irish border, for example. This integrity of the internal market is for us so important as the integrity of the United Kingdom is for London important. And therefore, I think we cannot move in that question, and there can no cherry-picking solution for the United Kingdom. We want to have a solution, but it cannot be so that someone who leaves the European Union does not take over the responsibilities of the European Union can have the same advantages as countries who are stay in the European Union and fulfill the obligations.
Elmar Brok, you've been twice chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. Many people would argue that Britain will be diminished by leaving the European Union. From your estimation, will the European Union also be diminished by losing the influence of a major member state?
For sure, it's a lose-lose situation for both of us. And in economic reasons, as a trading power, but also in security policy, we would like to have Britain in. But Britain is, in this market case, 13 times smaller than the market of the European Union. So you know who will be the stronger part negotiating free trade deals over the world, what we have done already with 65 countries, including just now with Japan. Britain has nothing. And we have to see that in security policy, we have to come closer together in internal security, fighting terrorism, for example. And therefore, I would prefer that Britain would stay in, or if it does not stay in, we would have a deal which makes it possible for the free trade agreements, for perhaps even customs union, for internal and external security and such questions, to have negotiations in our common interest. But a hard Brexiteers have a nationalist belief of global Britain, which has nothing to do with the reality in this world, and will bring harm to all of us.
Elmar Brok, you've explained why Europe will show solidarity with Ireland, a loyal member state, and redeem its commitments to the Good Friday Agreement. What's your feelings towards Scotland, a nation within the United Kingdom, but a strongly pro-European nation? Can you appreciate Scotland's dilemma of being dragged out of Europe against the will of its people?
Look, I have lived for 1 year in Scotland. I was an old college and University of Edinburgh, and this is one of the nations which is closest to my heart. I have visited twice now in the last year Scotland. I was in the Highlands to look at my places I was at former times as a student. And this country is so wonderful. This is so pro-European. They've understood that only together we are strong enough in this world and not divided. And therefore, I wish Scotland all the luck for the future. And I know that the membership in the European Union is of the utmost importance for the future economic and social development of Scotland.
If the Scottish people so decided at some point in the future, would there be a welcome at the European table for the nation of Scotland?
Look, I think if that is done in a referendum under the rules of the United Kingdom, as you have done it, and then they would decide so, I think it would be then easy to have membership negotiations because Scotland fulfills all the needs for membership, because all the standards are already there. And therefore, I think I am not pushing for dividing the United Kingdom. Hopefully, the United Kingdom could be a member of the whole together of the European Union. But if United Kingdom goes out of the European Union, I can imagine that the Scottish people will think a second time.
Mr. Brok, can I ask you, what is the best you hope for in this situation? And also, what are your worst fears about this situation?
Look, my dreams is Britain will stay in, but I think this is unrealistic in this situation. The best would have this withdrawal agreement and then have time for proper arrangements and agreements that we can keep the damage down. The worst is that we have a hard Brexit by default and that we then have all these problems coming out of that, especially Britain, especially Northern Ireland and Scotland. But I think also harm for us, and I hope that realism overcomes the present situation in such a way that we find a solution in the upcoming weeks.
Elmar Brok, on a personal level, you're about to leave the European Parliament after 40 years, Europe's longest-serving parliamentarian with many, many huge contributions to the development of Europe. Is there one aspect that sticks in your mind that you'll look back and say, that was an achievement of which collectively we can be proud?
I think as I started in the European Union, we were 9 member countries in the European Parliament, which has nothing to say. We had a weak customs union. Now we have a strong internal market, have a monetary union, a beginning of a defense policy. We have a parliament which has closed the democratic deficit in the European Union. This is a strong European Union which can play a role in the world and does play a role in this world, because in the time of Xi and Putin and Trump, only together we have a chance. And please, we should not, because of populism, because of discussion in member countries whether democracy and the rule of law should play such a role in the future as we believe it should. This all makes me nervous, and hopefully in the European Parliament elections, but also in the capitals of our continent, the people are so strong to look in the interest of Europe, which can be only sovereign if we are together. Every nation alone is too weak to get sovereignty for its own people. Together we can get back sovereignty for our own people, but only together as Europeans.
Elmar Brok, thank you so much for joining us on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you, Alex. All the best for you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
And to you, sir.
Join us after the break to get a leading columnist's view on what Brexit might mean for Scotland. We'll see you then. Welcome back. The Jacobite column in the Brussels Express is known for its penetrating insights into the politics of Eastern Europe. However, as the name suggests, the column was written by an expat Scot, the entrepreneur James Wilson. Alex caught up with him in Brussels and asked him to take a look west on the future of Scotland when Britain goes Brexit.
Well, James Wilson, entrepreneur, expat Scot in Brussels, but in particular, a columnist. You write the Jacobite column from the Brussels Express, and a well-known and very entertaining column. You're in a great position to tell us what on earth do people think is happening in the UK at the present moment as regards Brexit?
Well, I think most people are very concerned at what seems to be an anti-immigrant spiral which is happening in the British public. And they view these news shots of the Parliament in Westminster with the MPs booing each other like a pack of baboons, and they're very bemused. They see that the situation is chaotic. Many of them, if they've been thinking about coming to study in the UK or to work in the UK, are having second thoughts. So is that meaningful, that people who are perhaps going to visit or to study or to work will say, well, wait a minute, I better see how things are going to turn out? Absolutely, and I'm speaking also for my own children here. They're coming to the view that they should be looking for their future in Europe rather than the UK, for their careers and future studies.
And you yourself, I mean, you've been a long-term resident of Brussels, but you've just very recently taken out Belgian citizenship as a direct response to the Brexit referendum in the UK.
That's right. I've lived in Belgium for about 30 years, so I've been paying my taxes here for a while. But the trigger to take Belgian citizenship was this referendum in June 2016, because I saw that as going against everything that I'd achieved in my career by having the ability to move freely around Europe, set up my business where I wanted. I saw that as being taken away. And I also disliked very much the rise of racism and far-right politics in the UK.
But that's not confined to the UK. I mean, the far right is in the march in many countries in Europe.
That's true, but this is not what I had expected of the country where I was brought up and educated. I didn't like what I saw happening there.
In far right, you're brought up and educated in Scotland, James, and the far right isn't on the advance in Scotland.
In the whole Brexit debate, I think the only party which has acted with dignity and with integrity is the Scottish Nationalist Party and the Scottish government. So they've come out of the debate rather well, and particularly in the European Parliament, a lot of people remember the speech by Alan Smith, where he... This
was immediately after the referendum, where he received, quite unusual in the European Parliament, a standing ovation for saying, you know, effectively, we will be with you if you will be with us, the rest of Europe.
In terms of Scotland and Scottish politicians, they're viewed quite favourably in Europe.
Have you any explanation why it's in the UK, and in the UK alone, that disgruntlement with the European Union has translated itself into an anxiety to get out of the European Union?
There's a lot of the blame lies with the Conservative government, who for years have been telling the British public that any problems are with Brussels. Boris Johnson was the Daily Telegraph correspondent here in Brussels when Thatcher was the Prime Minister, and he would write stories about bent cucumbers and square strawberries, putting all of the blame on Brussels. So for years, the British public has had a diet of tabloid blame for any bureaucry or stupid legislation on the EU.
Now, we mustn't credit the former Foreign Secretary with too much influence, but nonetheless, there is, and you touch on, the UK press have had a fiercely anti-European Union attitude stretching back 20 or 30 years. So, when one remembers the famous Sun newspaper front page, what was it? Up yours, Dolores. It didn't run in Scotland, that front page, incidentally, back in the 1990s. So do you think that has conditioned the UK public over a period of time to be the only country which translates Euroscepticism into Brexit?
Yes, I believe that the press has a lot to answer for, and the media coverage. People have short memories, and they forget that actually at the time of President Delors, who was behind creating the single market? Well, it was the British Commissioner, Lord Cockfield, who'd been appointed by Margaret Thatcher.
He was Margaret Thatcher's man.
He was indeed, and he drove through a formidable amount of legislation which led to the creation of Europe's single market.
The question, of course, I want to ask you, as you'll understand, as an expat Scot, writing a column which roams large, but a column still called Jacobi, which indicates that you like to look, and recently you looked at the future of Scotland in terms of what's happening in the UK and the Brexit process. Was that a return to home thoughts from Europe, or was that a saying, well, I'd really like to get back to discussing the future of my own country?
Looking back to the independence referendum for Scotland in 2014.
Which I remember well.
There was this campaign, Better Together, with spokesmen like Gordon Brown, who were warning the Scottish electorate, if you vote for independence, you will be asked to leave the EU. You will not be able to keep your membership of the EU. And I believe that had an influence on the outcome of the vote. And nobody could have expected that 2 years later, the Prime Minister would be coming back to the electorate again to ask, well, we'd like to ask you, would you like to leave the EU or not? And then having voted 62% in favour of staying against 38% who wanted to leave, to have their advice ignored.
That's the advice of Scotland.
The advice of Scotland, sorry. Every electoral district, I believe, in Scotland, every ward voted to stay. And then for the government to turn around to say, well, thank you very much, but you're just part of the UK and your vote doesn't actually count, is shameful. It's an absolute disgrace.
So you think that there'll be a political consequence of that?
The political consequence, I believe, is that the Scottish electorate will not take this lying down. You cannot be so undemocratic and neo-colonialist in your treatment of voters. I believe that we'll have a sea change in the electorate who will be demanding independence from the UK.
And of your knowledge of other European countries, which ones do you think would be more Scottish friendly under these circumstances, who perhaps were a bit leery before?
Scotland has a lot of friends in Europe. For example, David McAllister in Germany.
Of course, a Scottish father.
Absolutely.
It was, I think, of the Army of the Rhine, and a very prominent Conservative politician in Germany, but still very much a leader in Angela Merkel's, and even quoted sometimes as her potential successor.
Yes, so I believe Germany, for example, will look favourably upon a Scottish call for independence. The Netherlands, here in Belgium also, the mood has changed. And
so James, the mood has changed. So you think the result of Brexit has been to make more Europeans think, well, you know, if the English want to see the back of us, then maybe the Scots and the Irish, of course, potentially will stay. So your analysis would be that the end game of Brexit may well be to reconfigure the United Kingdom, both in Scotland and potentially in Ireland.
I believe that in Ireland it's inevitable that the two parts will come together at some point in history. This is just a question of time. But for Scotland, as I say, the realisation that the electorate is being ignored by the Parliament in Westminster, it's a wake-up call.
So, James Wilson, what you're saying is that the law of unintended consequences for Britain's Brexiteers, they may actually sink the British ship.
Absolutely. I'm afraid that the ship of state is shortly to be on the rocks.
James Wilson, thank you so much, and for appearing on the Alex Salmond Show. I'm delighted to present you with a quaich.
Oh, that's a great honour. Thank you so much.
I don't have to tell a lad from Lockerbie the drill. Whiskey and the quaich, round your many expatriate friends, and of course, only Scotch.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Theresa May dashed to the desert at the weekend, but came back with only sand rather than substance. As a result, the parliamentary stakes on Brexit were raised again this week, with the clock steadily ticking towards March 29th.
This is a shameful moment. Nothing has changed, apart from the fact that some of us who used to sit over there are now sitting over here.
Can the Prime Minister tell me, though, what she thinks is the maximum extension she would seek to our withdrawal?
I want to see, were there to be an extension, I believe it should be as short as possible.
Surely it is perfectly possible and utterly democratic for us to go back and ask the public whether the deal she has negotiated is acceptable or not.
This is Alex's take on the week with just 1 month to go until B-Day.
When I was a lad, my muckers and I played the street game Kick the Can. Since in this online age it's all but died out, it's worth just mentioning the rules. If you were it, you had to catch and tag the other players, which put them into a holding pen beside a can in the road. However, if even one of them got to your can undetected and kicked it down the road, then they were all released and the game continued, often for a very long time with no perceptible progress whatsoever. When Theresa May was of a similar age, we know from her own account that she naughtily walked through fields of wheat without permission. It is not recorded whether there was any can to kick in the Prime Minister's field of dreams, but her childlike exercise sounds every bit as futile as was mine. However, kicking the can or walking through fields of wheat represents a clearly defined objective compared to the Prime Minister's approach to Brexit in the House of Commons. Her latest decision of not to decide yet again defies rational explanation, which is why everybody's so confused about it in Westminster. And in the real world, I doubt now if there's a single voter who is not lost in the maze of twists and turns. Now, it's of course possible that I'm doing the Prime Minister a gross injustice. Perhaps there's a supreme cunning plan of which everyone else is only dimly aware. Perhaps she's a secret no-dealer, making a hard Brexit inevitable by default. Perhaps she's a subtle political strategist who all along has plotted the forced realignment of British politics out of this chaos of Brexit. Perhaps she calculates MPs will crack when faced with no deal, as opposed to, well, just taking charge themselves and ruling it out. Perhaps she thinks the European Commission will give up, exasperated, exhausted, outlasted by her sheer stubbornness. Most likely, she believes it's the Brexiteers of both parties who will be dragooned into line, rather than face the emerging possibility of another referendum. Any and all of these things are possible. In the same way, it's possible for our sun to go into supernova next weekend, but they are still inherently unlikely. Most likely, this is yet another aimless postponement of the evil day, where the economy falters, the political establishment disintegrates, and our cabinet dissolves into factions. Politics is not just the art of the possible. It's the skill of making the impossible palatable, at least bearable to those who vehemently disagree with you. In that central task of statecraft, this Prime Minister has failed not once, not twice, not thrice, but many times over. Merely postponing the evil day until the Ides of March is no substitute for the skill required to solve this Brexit Rubik's Cube. Back in the day when someone kicked my can down the road, I knew I'd made no progress and wearily set about catching my pals again. However, I also comforted myself that the game would come to a natural end when darkness fell. It's not clear that the Prime Minister is aware how close she is now to that final twilight. And now from Tasmina and myself and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now.